first special budget ordinance.
Ordinance C 36193, amending ordinance number C 36161, passed by the City Council December 13, 2021, and entitled, an ordinance adopting the annual budget of the City of Spokane for 2022, making appropriations to the various funds of the City of Spokane government for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2022, and providing it shall take effect immediately upon passage and declaring an emergency and appropriating funds in forfeitures and contributions funds. Fund number 1, increase appropriations by $175,000. A, of the increased appropriations, $40,000 of the increase is to be used as confidential funds used for controlled purchases of illegal substances. B, $125,000 shall be used to fund a request for proposal to nonprofit entities that provide at-risk youth services that will support prevention of drug use and drug crimes using peer support and leadership for individuals who have successfully exited criminal justice involvement. C, $10,000 for training. 2, the increased appropriation is funded from unappropriated reserves in the forfeitures and contributions fund. This action arises from the need to continue and expand the use of confidential funds. Deferred from September 12, 2022 agenda.
All right, we have some testimony on that. And just to kick off the discussion, this is a special budget ordinance, so it takes 5 votes to pass. It was originally proposed by the administration this spring because they needed $40,000 more for confidential funds for buying drugs and giving to confidential informants. There's $10,000 for training, and they originally asked for $25,000 for to a nonprofit for at-risk youth services. Council, I don't know if it was in May or June, amended it to add $100,000 to the youth side of it because there was sufficient reserves in the fund for that. And now we're here for a vote on that. And we have, the first person up is Jennifer Hicks. And after Jennifer Hicks is Kim Schmidt and then Tracy Bloom.
Thank you, Council President Beggs and Spokane City Council. It's great to see you tonight. You probably know the statistics. They're horrible. 186% increase in fentanyl overdoses from 20 to 21 in Spokane County. And the federal government just named Spokane one of 11 crisis areas for fentanyl deaths in the United States. This is terrible. This is horrible. And I and many of my friends are not feeling safe in our community. And I am against the City Council reappropriating the Spokane Police Department's funding. Forfeiture of property net proceeds are required to be remitted to the state, and they're to be retained by the seizing law enforcement agency exclusively for the expansion and improvement of controlled substances. I trust our law enforcement to spend the money in the appropriate manner. And I don't approve of the City Council making decisions for Spokane Police Department on this money. I just learned that this is the only city that's trying to do this to our police department, to a police department. It is their funds, and they should have the ability to spend it in the way that they find appropriate. And I know that they have our best interest at heart, and they are trying to keep us safe. And I'm very upset with the way that our city is going downhill. And it is in large part because of the actions of some of the people on the City Council. I'm very disappointed in your decision to defund the police. And this is a smoke and mirrors way to do that. There is other money that can be found for youth drug rehab, and I'm for that. You can use ARPA money. We know there's money there. You can get grants. But people are more than statistics. People are dying in our streets. Families are being devastated by the loss of their children and their loved ones because of drugs. We need to stop this scourge that's happening in our city. And I beg you to please let the police department do their job. Let them have control over their funds that is rightfully theirs. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down, Jennifer. Kim Schmidt, then Tracy Bloom, and then Mayor Woodward.
Hi, Kim Schmidt from the Valley. I'm going to start tonight with a brief qualifier. In 2008, a judge gave me two options. I could either go to jail or I could go to treatment. I chose treatment. I've now been sober for 14 years. I spent 8 of those 14 years working as a licensed drug and alcohol counselor at a well-respected program in California. Since getting sober, I have also maintained a connection to a 12-step community. As a counselor, I worked with clients both one-on-one and in group settings. Sorry, my voice is a little bit gone today. One thing that is very clear through my work in the field and in my own personal experience is that cutting off supply does not lead to stop or reduced use. I make this statement aimed at the $40,000 to be used for drug buys and confidential informants. I listened to the meetings before the meeting, and I can't help but feel that the representatives from the Spokane Police who have spoken on the matter feel that the two issues, one being getting off drugs or getting drugs off the street through buys and CI payments, and the user getting sober are correlated. They're not correlated. I can assure you that those who are active in their addiction are flexible, highly motivated, and unwavering in their dedication to obtain the substance that their body requires. In fact, many will switch substances, pay more, find a new dealer, engage in extremely risky, often illegal behavior just so they can feel better. Those caught up in addictive behaviors will go to great lengths to secure their supply. I have a friend who you would never know now, but she literally ran her car full speed into a brick wall because her doctor stopped giving her pills. She needed her pills. I see minimum advantage to spending taxpayer money to buy drugs. I do feel that it is important to know what substances are on the street so that first responders can adjust accordingly, so that they can have supplies of Narcan and they can be able to protect themselves from something like dermal fentanyl exposure. I am by no means suggesting that we foster a lawless society of addicts and alcoholics. After all, actions do have consequences. But when we rely on the legal system to manage those deep in their addiction, it's often too late. We must look at the person behind the addiction to make any impactful change. The disease of addiction is multi-pronged. It's biological, psychological, and environmental. There's a lot of moving parts to it. I would like to see more money being spent on primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention methods. High importance should be placed on education. This includes doctors. A large majority of those dependent on substances are introduced to the substances through their healthcare providers. People need to know things like the fentanyl that's been floating around that folks like the sheriff has been posting pictures of have the same markings as pharmacy-grade oxycodone. Just as mental health professionals have already been proven effective when dispatched to certain police calls, it would be effective for substance use professionals to accompany police on certain calls. Also proven effective in other areas, outreach teams that can connect and assess and help those who are ready to seek treatment. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down. Tracy? And after Tracy is Mayor Woodward and Chief Meidel.
My name's Tracy Blum. That's my father's last name. I lost him because of drinking and driving in Seattle, Washington. I also lost my mother my dad by 42, my mother by 52 because of staph infection. I came to Spokane, Washington when I was 16, and I'm now 52. I started raising my children here, now grandchildren, and I am proud of that. And I'm proud to also be clean and sober today because I went to Spark for my 52nd birthday, so I can show my kids a different way of life. Code enforcement, Pier 1 Spokane, 6th and Cannon Shelter, and these other hater groups I'm having issues with. They keep getting me mixed up with other Tracys, and unfortunately, we all need safe housing. That's all I have to say about that, so thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Mayor Woodward, come on down. And then after Mayor is Chief Meidel, and then Sherry Barnett.
Thank you, Council President Beggs and council members. I am here in support of our incredible Spokane Police Department and our police chief. Specifically, I'm here to support Chief Meidel's ability to decide how to best use forfeiture funds for his own department. I oppose this ordinance because it conflicts with guidance that we've received and it expands the permissible expenses that forfeiture funds can be used for. I also oppose this ordinance because this is a decision our police chief should be making, not City Council. No other police chief in the state of Washington must get permission from his or her own City Council on how to spend these funds. Several months ago, Chief Meidel requested $40,000 in forfeiture funds for controlled drug buys to get illegal drugs off the street. It is a tool that is widely used to fight the influx of illicit drugs and go after drug dealers. That's several months of proactive work our officers could have focused on to make our city safer. I know you're all aware of the fentanyl crisis that Spokane, like so many other cities in this country, are facing. It's the deadliest challenge our country is facing. It has killed more than 100,000 people last year. It's the leading killer of Americans 18 to 45 years old. Last year, Spokane County saw a 185% increase in fentanyl-related overdoses. And just last week, a new and especially frightening headline for parents everywhere. Drug cartels are now targeting children and young adults with rainbow fentanyl made to look just like candy. Spokane is a regional narcotics distribution hub because of its proximity to Canada and to Interstate 90, which is used to move drugs to eastern states. This ordinance would spend $120,000 of the police department's forfeiture funds for youth drug prevention programs. Youth drug prevention programs are a great idea, no argument here. We need to do more to work upstream to educate children about the dangers of drugs, but this should not come at the expense of SPD's drug enforcement activities. And if you continue to delay SPD's ability to access their forfeiture funds, more illicit drugs will find their way onto our streets. You council allocated $3 million from ARPA for youth behavioral programs. That's a lot of money. You can use that money. Don't deplete SPD's forfeiture funds with this ordinance, and please, I ask you, let our police chief do the job he was hired to do, to lead his department, to make the decisions that keep our community safe without the constant microscopic oversight of the City Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Woodward. Chief Meidel.
Good evening, Council President, members of the Council. Craig Meidel, Chief of Police for the Spokane Police Department. Thank you for giving me a few minutes. I'm told one thing to never do publicly is do math. I'm going to violate that rule real quick, so I'm going to be happy to go back and go over those details with you. But this whole process asking for this $40,000 started back on April 25th. Originally, SPD asked for $120,000 this year for drug investigations. We were given $80,000 out of that $120,000. So we went back knowing we would need that money to continue our drug investigations on April 25th. The current balance of state drug forfeiture funds after 2022 allocations and SBOs approved by the council is currently $481,000. So if we spend $125,000 on youth intervention programs, $120,000 every year on drug investigations, which we've spent over the last 2 years, $10,000 on training and travel, which is a typical request every year, and then $120,000 on undercover cars, that is a total of $375,000 a year. When you subtract $375,000 a year from $481,000, that leaves $106,000 in this fund. To date, we have $90,000 sitting on property from forfeiture monies. So if you add that $90,000 to what will be left next year, if we go down this road, we will have $196,000 for all of these items in 2024. So when you're looking at over $350,000 commitment, if we go down this road, we will only have $196,000 starting in 2024. Our drug commander pointed out at the Public Safety Committee meeting that our seizures are going down. We believe based on the Blake decision. So we don't believe that we're going to have funding coming in at the same level that it has come in prior years. And then I want to reiterate what the mayor said as well. We are 100% supportive of education. We think it's a two-pronged approach. We need to go after the dealers that are bringing these toxins into our city right now and get them off the street. And then we also need to educate, especially our youth, before they go down this road so that they never take that first hit, that first smoke, or that first injection. And I know the mayor has committed to working with the council on finding other funding sources as well. And just to reiterate what some of the numbers show as well, in Spokane County, from 2014 to 2020, we had a 600% increase in overdose deaths. Last year, according to the medical examiner's report, if all overdose deaths combined, 285% increase in 2021 versus 2020. Washington had almost 3 times the drug overdose rate as the rest of the nation last year, and this is according to the CDC. And then we all know the figure of over 105,000 people died in 1 year, according to the CDC, due to drug overdoses. It's almost twice as many as died in the Vietnam War. And here we are still talking about the Vietnam War after all of this time. And in 1 year, we lost more than we did during all of the Vietnam War. That's in 1 year due to drug overdoses. We support the intervention. We're just asking, this is the money we have that we absolutely need to continue that enforcement part as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Council President, can I ask a question of the Chief?
Sure.
Chief, if barring any changes as presented, would you prefer that council passes as it is or not?
So the 40,000 with the 125,000 for youth intervention?
Yeah.
Do not pass.
Okay.
I have to have money in here at some point to continue these drug investigations, and I know what we're looking like overall going into 2023, and things aren't looking good for next year as well, so I need this funding, which is perfectly aligned for drug enforcement.
Thank you.
But Chief, I just want to be crystal clear. So you would prefer that we not give you the 40,000 that you asked for if it comes along with the money for youth?
That is correct.
That is, okay. And do you have money in your account to finish the year without the 40,000 that you requested? Because that's why you requested it before.
We do not.
So what would you do for your confidential informant and drug buying?
We'll either have to come and find other money from the general fund, or we'll have to stop drug investigations.
Okay, thanks. Sherry Barnett.
This is one bad thing I haven't personally done. Oh, Council President and all members of the City Council. But I belong to a church that is very heavily recovering dope addicts and alcoholics. And it wasn't very long ago that we all, I wrote a letter, and many, many people, we got as many people as we could to write letters asking the party in majority not to pass that legalizing heroin and meth and all these things in certain amounts, magic mushrooms. These things are killing young people because young people now do not have values. They no longer think about the 10 Commandments. They no longer have a strong family ties. And without hardly, I've never heard an exception to it. The people that speak of having come to their senses thank the law enforcement. They thank the city jail, they thank the penitentiary because they sat there and they got their brain clear and they got dried out enough that they could make a change in their life. So I urge you to quit taking power into your hands and give the power to the people that are able to save their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That's the end of public comment. Any council commentary? Councilmember Kinnear.
Just a quick question, because in reference to something that Chief Meidel said, under F of the current ordinance, it states the city's top priorities for spending state authorized funds in 2022 and 23 are as follows. The city will annually fund these two priorities equally from state funds and will not expend additional state forfeiture funds if it would reduce the reserve of state forfeiture funds below $250,000. So it sounded like when you were doing the math up here that adding those all up, it would not be $250,000. Therefore, I'm just clarifying. Therefore, we would not be able to spend the money on youth programs because he wouldn't have enough in his reserve.
Yeah, you are a little bit getting ahead of yourself because that's another ordinance, not this spending ordinance, but yeah, essentially.
Okay, but I was responding to,
Yeah.
I just wanted to clear that up. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, thank you. So, we had a robust debate during our briefing session, so for those who maybe didn't see that, you can go back and view that. But really, I think the argument that I was making, and I'll just reiterate here very quickly, is, and the chief put it better than any of us can, and that's simply that these dollars are really important for the chief and his department to be able to do the enforcement that they do with the CI drug buys and whatnot. And it's obviously getting very difficult for them with the Blake decision. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of what the future of that law that the legislature replaced the Blake decision with is going to be. It sunsets next summer, and so the legislature could, create something that's worse, better. There's an initiative signatures are being collected on right now that would completely legalize drugs, is my understanding. And so there's a lot of just variables out there. And the chief just said, when you add up the dollars, there's just not enough to fund what they know they need to fund in the coming year. And so, he's our industry expert. He's the one that's charged with sort of guarding this account. And the ordinances that are in place today, as of this moment that we're speaking, essentially say that the chief needs to put forward the ideas that we consider. And, everybody in this room watching on City Cable 5 heard the chief say that, and that's how important this is. He would vote no on this or would advocate a no vote if it meant that it would potentially drain the coffers of this fund. I'm somebody who has sort of a love-hate relationship with civil asset forfeiture. I think there's a lot of good it can do because obviously it provides us an opportunity to seize assets from bad people out there and hopefully interrupt their operations. But at the same time, a lot of times we seize assets, before, this is the broad we, not City of Spokane, but the broad we seize assets, before there's a conviction, before we know that somebody is in fact guilty of whatever it is they're accused of. And that has always rubbed me the wrong way. So I have a love-hate relationship with it. But the fact is, the way it is what it is right now. And the money is there, and it's pretty clear to me who is supposed to make the decisions with regards to how those dollars are spent. It's the chief. I trust Chief Meidel. I trust his judgment on this, and so I will vote accordingly and oppose as it is drafted.
Councilmember Bingle.
Thank you, sir. So quick point of clarification on this, on F. It says the city will annually fund these two priorities equally from state funds and will not expend additional state forfeiture funds if it would reduce the reserve state of forfeiture funds below $250,000. It doesn't mean that this doesn't say that we wouldn't stop funding at-risk youth drug prevention programming if we got down to $250,000. It just says that we won't drain that account less than $250,000, which effectively gives it a zero balance at $250,000. And so we actually would run out of money sooner if we had to stop it at $250,000 because it doesn't prioritize one of these over the other. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's how I'm reading it so far as that.
The way I'm understanding it is you could spend up to the $250,000 if you spend it on those two priorities.
Right.
But you couldn't spend it on some other thing that's a lower priority to the department if it goes below 250.
But we wouldn't stop spending on at-risk drug youth prevention programming at $250,000 so that we can continue to keep spending on CIs, though, correct? Those two things would have to keep getting spent at the same time.
That's how it's currently written.
Right. And so, again, the trouble is that when it comes to the amount of money that we're spending on it, what ends up happening is, as we're talking about, we have purchased undercover vehicles here. We have drug buys that are happening out of this. And then if we're also spending that same exact amount, dollar for dollar, if we do $120,000 for undercover vehicles, if we do $120,000 for CI informants, then that to me says that we have to spend $240,000 on youth drug programming.
No. The youth drug programming is tied just to the confidential informant drug buys.
Okay.
So it's not tied to other things.
Gotcha. So on the CIs, if we're going to be spending 120, then we're still spending 120 on the youth programming. The thing in question here isn't should we spend on youth drug prevention programming. Again, every single person acknowledges why that's important, because we do need to swim upstream. And we're talking about how dangerous this is for children, because we have read those articles, the terrifying articles that children in middle schools and in grade schools are being exposed to fentanyl because it looks like Skittles. I mean, that's terrifying stuff for any parent or grandparent or any community participant. I mean, that's terrifying stuff. And so we need to be able to identify the drug dealers and being able to stop their activities as best we can. And we also need to fund the youth drug prevention programming to help children understand, by the way, don't take this. If you don't know what it is, don't take it. That's equally important. The thing at hand, though, is where do we fund it from? And unfortunately, this account will get drained quickly if this is something that we're committing to. One of the other things that makes this tough is one of the reasons why we don't want to commit to too much future spending with this is because that becomes the obvious legal problem, is that what we don't want to have happen is that the community believes that officers are seizing property because we've committed to too much spending in the future. That's one of the reasons why we can't commit to future expenditures with this money, is because we don't want it to look as if we're seizing property to fund liabilities. And so for me, I think these are both good things. It's just that this fund is not the right fund. Councilman Cathcart and I have proposed several amendments to strike through, to propose different funding sources for this, because it is important to do. But currently in this state right here, even though I'm a sponsor of this ordinance, I will be opposing it as is, because this is just not the right not the right fund to get the money from for this particular action. And I hope that what ends up happening is tonight, because it's an SBO. I hope that this fails, just so that we can actually give the police the $40,000 they need to continue their activities in the community. I hope they get the $10,000 for training, and then I hope we have a separate discussion to find money in the budget and in these different revenue sources that we've all talked about earlier to fund these programs substantially, because there is great value in it. But as it is right now, I won't be supporting.
Councilmember Wilkerson.
Thank you. So, thank you, Mayor and Chief. First of all, I think I want to start with, people think we are defunding the police because we didn't vote for this, and that is absolutely not true. Everything that has come before this council requested by police, we've just about funded. So whether this vote goes yes or no, it's not about defunding the police. It is about where the money comes from, and it's about accountability. So we talk a lot about accountability for everybody. And I have just asked the police department, tell us some outcomes or data that this confidential informant money has brought about, some success. We keep hearing how big the problem is, so I just need to understand that pouring $40,000 more into this huge fund will garner us some outcomes that we are looking for. I need to know that when we invest in our young people, that we will expect accountability from that also, and how that will impact upstream. So they're not mutually exclusive, but I think the citizens really want to know, well, what comes of the confidential informant money? How much are we capped at 120? Or truly, do you need more? We don't know, because we haven't heard that type of dialogue from the chief going forward. So again, what's the accountability piece? What's the deliverables are we expecting as we put more money into this confidential informant program? Not saying it's not needed, but what should we be expecting when we fund that now and as we go forward? So I will be supporting, because I think we need both. And Chief, I'm really sorry that you would rather not fund anything than to go down this road, but that's the decision of your department of how we go forward.
Councilmember Bingham.
Well, I will say one of the things is that one of the reasons why this got deferred was so that we could have a discussion, and then we ended up not having discussion on this. And I don't remember us once asking the chief to give us, metrics when it comes to the CI buys, and I'm sure that if we would have asked for it, that we would have heard something there. And so for me, I don't think it's necessarily about defunding the police, but I think there's a lot in here that when we're talking about police, we just amended something else that they asked us for, where we're going to give them, half of what they need, and then we're not going to give them, the other half of what they've asked for. And so I don't necessarily think that it's that we don't give the police something, but I think the things that we ask of the police are things that we don't ask of many other departments, right? When it comes to the fire engines from ARPA, our like third week on the job, we approved, the fire engines after 15 minutes of discussion. The police were tasked with a 2-year survey of studying the difference between gas vehicles and electric vehicles. And so it's not necessarily that we're saying, no, we're not going to give you what you need. We certainly ask far more of our police to defend their expenditures than we ask of any other department, in my opinion. And so it's not necessarily that we're defunding the police, but there is far more hoops that we ask the police to go through to get what they believe is the best tool to get the job done. And so I think that's an important distinction, but still.
Councilmember Zepone.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating to hear from the chief that he doesn't want us to fund it because we've been blamed for not funding this and holding this up when that's clearly not the case. We've been wanting to move it forward, and now we are being told to actually vote it down. And so I think that should be clear for the record that the recommendation from the police chief is to not support this and to not fund the police in their request for this. I also find it frustrating that the mayor just made a recommendation that we should use ARPA funding from youth behavioral health. I've met with the mayor and asked her several times about what she thinks we should prioritize youth behavioral health ARPA funding on. And just now was the first time I heard anything from you about that. And so I think that's very frustrating. I think our job on council is to look at the big picture and holistically. The police do a great job and they're experts at what they do, but they don't see the whole picture. And so I think part of our job is to see that whole picture. And what we see is also that there are other ways that we can invest funding to decrease drug use in our community. We all agree it's a big problem. And I think we know that youth prevention programs are also beneficial. We also know that drug rates have gone up over time. So just using the forfeiture funds, how they've been used historically, is not going to stop drug use in our community. It's time for us to try new things. And so that is why I'm supporting this and supporting our funding to be used on youth behavioral health, to try new things and to try to combat drug use in our community.
I think it's important to note the distinction between saying, no, I don't want this money to be able to do my job, and no, if we spend the money the way that you have told me to spend the money is going to, in the chief of police's opinion, bankrupt a fund that keeps them from being able to fight the drug services. So I think there's a difference in saying, no, don't give us this money to fight drugs, and don't give us this money for drugs, while also saying that I have to spend this money on something that this money I don't believe is what it's intended for. And so I don't think it's fair to say that the chief is saying, no, let's not fight drugs, because that's not what he's saying. And so, yeah.
Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, just to piggyback, I mean, I interpreted the chief's words as, we'll just reset and live to fight again another day, is really what I heard. And, he said it himself, we'll look for other aspects of funding, we'll come back in the next budget cycle. I mean, I just think he was pretty clear in his reasoning, and so he's not just willy-nilly saying, vote this down, even though I've been asking for it. He has some very legitimate concerns that he has shared. And furthermore, and I've said this before, he is the person who is in charge of making sure that this fund is sustainable and is used for the proper things. And, he has asked us for very specific requests. And again, we should just follow what his request is, I believe, because, we can still fund the $125,000 or $100,000 for the youth at-risk services through other means. Could be ARPA. That was the proposal that I had brought forward earlier today. That didn't pass. But, I mean, still, let's have that conversation. Let's set that aside and allocate the $40,000 and have a real conversation around what the best source of funding is for that 125. Move forward and implement a youth services program.
I just want to talk about this budget bankruptcy thing, because I just have seen no evidence of that. That's what it seems like the core argument that, oh my gosh, if you spend $240,000 a year from this fund, as mandated by another ordinance, then you will bankrupt it. So right now, if we pass this and give the chief the money he wants for additional drug buying and confidential informant and some training money, and fund the youth program that he requested earlier, but at a higher amount, we'll still have over $300,000 this year. This year's collections, just through, I think it's July or August, were the second highest ever. So this idea that Blake has changed the world, there just is no evidence. It's been 2 years since Blake. The last few years, the drug forfeiture funds have just been pouring in more than ever. So to imagine that it's suddenly going to be cut off without any evidence of that, that's what I don't understand. My recollection is that the appeal period, if your money or property is seized under the drug forfeiture laws, is about 60 days. So after 60 days, if you haven't filed an appeal on it, that means the city is going to get their share of the money. And so so you say there's 90,000 on the books. That's okay. That's 90,000. That's definitely coming. That's not 90,000 for the rest of the year or 90,000 for all of next year. That's just what's in the books right now. So we purposely changed this language, Councilmember Kinnear's request, to say, hey, let's just do this through 2023 and see if there is money in the budget or not. We changed that specifically today. Because if it turns out that there is this cliff that no one would be able to anticipate, but there is, and there's not enough money to do the confidential informants, then of course we'll change it. This is built on the premise that there's over, like I say, $300,000 in reserves after we make these expenditures, $481,000 right now. And the idea, as council members opposed, said that we need to do more than just controlled drug buys, because that is not slowing the rate. We heard the crisis. We agree on the crisis. And we've heard from Captain Arleth and Matt Folsom, the police department's attorney, that spending money on these kind of youth programs is a proper purpose for forfeiture and one that the police department has requested. The only dispute is the amount of money. That is the only dispute. And there's a remote fear that maybe somehow that will get in the way of having enough $120,000 next year for that, or $120,000 now. We're not going to let that happen. But as long as we have excess in this fund and the ability to work with our youth and stop the demand before bad things happen, that's where we're doing this. So the idea that we're going to lose the money out of the budget on Blake or any other reason is not. Even just Blake, just to be clear right now, any changes in it are not going to get rid of felony drug dealing. That's going to be that's where the money comes from in this. It's not from drug possession. It is drug dealing. Those are who have the money. It's not. So Blake doesn't really impact that I've seen, and certainly not by the money we've gotten in the last 2 years. So it gets a little bit down to, I guess, a little bit of a perceived power struggle. I'm sure the director of the streets department can tell us that he could spend the money better, yet we approved money for Strong Road. The streets department didn't want that. They said that is not a good idea based on their data, based on their expertise. But as council members opponents said, we're from a bigger, broader picture, and we think the community needs Strong Road to get fixed, even if the streets engineers don't like it. Same in the fire chief. We don't do everything that he wants. And I'm pretty sure every city in the state, their council approves the money that's spending, because that's how we do it. The administration proposes, and then the city council adjusts and approves what they're going to do. That's what we do on everything. And there's nothing different about this. Our current law does limit the council to only purposes that the police chief has approved as a legitimate crime fighting. This purpose for youth has been approved by the chief and requested. It's only a matter of policy of how much on it. So that's why I brought the amendment before. I think we need to increase our spending, and it is exactly right in the four corners of the forfeiture purpose under state law and under practice at the city. It's just recognizing that at this moment in time, we happen to have extra money, and at least 4 council members at one time or another have thought, that it would best serve and would reduce the drug crime and overdoses more by spending a little more money on youth interventions and education. Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, I guess in some of the points you made could absolutely be correct. But I would also just argue that the chief has brought another perspective, and he has some concerns. And so I would just ask, I mean, maybe it's rhetorical, but what is the harm in considering an alternative source of funding for this, especially if we consider it as a one-time pilot, that we would then look for other alternatives for future opportunities to continue it. But if there is potentially a risk that we would draw this fund down, or frankly, that with this ordinance passes later, and that we're funding two of these items at equal amounts, and as you pointed out, that we would absolutely not cut the CI funding if there wasn't enough money. Why not just avoid all of that, and let's just look for an alternative source of funding so that we don't have any risks or any of those red flags?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer your rhetorical question. But so whatever we do, there's a risk. If we take the money out of ARPA, that's money that we need. The ARPA remaining funds have been requested by the mayor for many different things, and there's a lot of community needs out there. We have this money. We have extra money in the forfeiture fund at the moment. And so I see there's little risk because it's extra. We have funded every SBO for forfeiture money that the department has requested. We have funded. So this is not a case of us defunding something for this. It is not. We have given them everything that they have asked for. So I don't see it. Because we have excess money, we have money now, I believe we should set it aside. As Councilmember Kinnear said, we won't necessarily get the money spent anytime in the near future because we have to do it, but we will at least have made a commitment of the money so that we can get nonprofits who would do it to actually bid on it. If it turns out in the next 3 or 4 months while we're going through that process that there's a cliff there, we don't have to spend it. We don't have to go under contract. This is not allocating a contract. It's putting a stake in the ground and saying, youth education, drug prevention is super important to us. These are the funds that we actually have. And potentially, if we continue at the same rate that we've been the last 2 years, it will be a sustainable force. A sustainable source of funding. So it's a risk, no matter, we could game it out, there's either way, but this money is there, and there seems to be quite a bit in the fund, so there's nothing that we're not spending on that we otherwise would at this time, and it gives us a foot in the door down that road. So. Councilmember Bingle.
And I just think that there are several ways to put that stake in the ground. I mean, we could do a resolution saying this is the policy of the city. These are things that we're pursuing. I mean, there's lots of ways that we could put that stake in the ground without pulling this money from this particular fund. And so, I hear everything that you're saying, and again, a lot of what you're saying is good in this sense that yes, we need to be swimming upstream and we need to be telling children drugs are bad. A very good message that needs to be delivered. Again, the only dispute, as you say, is that it's coming from here, but that is the big dispute, right? That is the big question here. And so while there might only be one dispute, it is a big dispute.
Any other commentary? Councilmember Wilkerson.
I'll just end with our investment in our young people. Yes, it is a stake in the ground. It is a message not only to our young people, but to our community that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I will ask us and the chief, if not now, when, because we've been asking. So please come with something, or a partnership, or a task force, or anything, but that hasn't been presented to us as to how we go forward. So at this point, I'm willing to it's not spent, it's just set aside, not spent, just set aside as we pursue this as an investment in our young people. If not now, when?
Councilmember Zapone.
Yeah, I would just lastly say, too, that if the chief brought this forward to us in April, the administration agrees that this is important. They have not identified other funding sources until tonight, which is months later. So if they had genuinely tried to find other funding sources, they had multiple chances. The mayor could have listed it on an ARPA funding priority and never did. So I don't believe there's actually motivation to find other funding for it from the administration side. So I think we have to do what we've been talking about for months.
Councilmember Kinnear.
I want to be real careful about pointing fingers on what the administration does and does not do, because I think that this hasn't been a priority for us. It's just kind of been pushed. And ARPA funding, although that's tantalizing because it's that free money stuff again, I hate that. It's probably mostly spent. The chief did offer to spend $25,000 on youth programs. We upped it to $100,000. So really and truly, we're quibbling about $100,000 and where that money's going to come from. And we're taking an awful lot of time to do it. And the administration's not opposing that $25,000. It's the amount and where it's coming from. So I don't know that we're ever going to come to an agreement, but we have that 1 year, because it's going to sunset. We have that 1 year to figure out how we're going to fund this in perpetuity, if it's important to us, if it actually makes a difference. So we have that 1 year to measure it, we have that 1 year to find a provider, and then we have that 1 year to find another source of funding. And I think that is important. So it's not as if this is it, we're always going to take money from this fund. It's got a sunset on it. And as Council President said, there's money in that for at least a year. So let's try this. If it doesn't work, we do something else. But we're all committed to making sure that our youth are protected and that they don't go down that road that we don't want them to go down. We're all committed to that. We're quibbling about $100,000 and where it's going to come from. Not the 25 that the chief says he's willing to spend, but the 100,000 that extra that we want to spend.
Councilmember Stratton.
Okay, Lori got me worked up.
I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. A couple things. I think it's important that everybody understand, and you probably know this if you watched our briefing and our committee meeting today, but we all are taking this very, very seriously. We may disagree with each other, but I want to be very clear to let people know that there is not one person up here on this dais that would ever talk about defunding the police. I want everybody to know that. We have a lot of respect for the police department. I cannot remember a time, this has been a lot of debate on this issue, but a time where we've all said, no, we're not going to spend that money. So I want the community to understand that we talk to each other, we agree to disagree and respect each other, and this has been a big issue for all of us on how we see this. The only thing I'm going to repeat from this afternoon is I think that we've gotten too far down in the weeds. It's starting to feel like a power struggle, and that's unfortunate. We all support programs for youth and drug education and prevention. There are so many programs in this community that are successful and that are worth funding. I'm happy to have a continued discussion about that, but I really believe, and Chief Meidel knows this about me, when I agree with the chief, he knows that, and we've had our back and forths, but I really believe this is his decision, and that we've gotten just way down, kind of directing something that he should be directing. So, Chief, if you don't want this to pass, then I will vote no on it. But I just want the community to know this is not an easy decision. We've all really put our heads to this and really tried to come up with some compromises. So that's where I'm at.
Any last comments? All right. Prepare to vote. Oops. We'll try again. Prepare to vote.
Okay. That looks good. Oh.
Okay, 4-3, which means it does not have 5, and so this special budget ordinance goes away. Brings us to the next. Oh, wait.